So this morning's gospel lesson is Jesus sending out 70 of his lesser disciples. These weren't the big 12, but 70 disciples, followers of Jesus that were sent out to go to all the towns that Jesus was planning to go to prepare the way, to cure the sick, cast out demons, all that good stuff. And he gave them a very specific list of things to do and in order to do them. And the very first thing he said was, when you enter a house, say to that house, peace be upon this house. That is a very powerful statement. It doesn't sound that way in English because peace doesn't have that kind of resonance in English. Like, oh, you want it to be calm, you want it to be not violent. But the word that Jesus would have given them to say in Hebrew would have been shalom. And in Hebrew, in the Jewish tradition, shalom is more than just your everyday peace. It was invoking the peace of God to rest on the people in the house. To invoke a peace that passes all understanding. To invoke a love of God and a knowledge of that love, and to ask the blessing of that peace. It's a very, very deep thing to greet someone with shalom. So the very first thing is to say, may the shalom of God be upon this house. Not to do a survey and make an assessment of whether or not they were worthy. Not to say, well, how many times have you gone to the synagogue in the past month? Have you donated appropriately? Are you saying all of your prayers? Are you a Gentile or are you a Jew? Are you a Samaritan? Are you the right race? Are you part of God's chosen or are you not chosen? None of that was important. All that was important was that these were people who were there, and the first thing to do is to offer them the peace of God that passes all understanding. Imagine what our world would look like if the first thing we did when interacting with people was to invoke the peace of God to be with them. As many of you are likely aware, I just recently got back from a civil rights pilgrimage where we went down to Atlanta and Selma and Montgomery, with a stop in Clinton, Tennessee on the way down and Berea, Kentucky on the way back. And I could preach probably at least 50, 100 sermons and not begin to cover everything that we experienced on this trip. But I do want to share one bit of that trip with you. And that was the day we were in Montgomery and we went to the Lynching Memorial and the Legacy Museum. And for a lot of reasons, I spent a lot of that day crying. Because it was just so emotional. For those of you who aren't aware what the Lynching Memorial and the Legacy Museum are about, it's done by an organization called the Equal Justice Initiative. And what they have done is they have gone through newspaper records and as whatever records they can find for verifiable accounts of where lynchings happened and who was lynched there. And the reality is we'll never know how many people were lynched throughout the civil rights movement and after slavery. We'll just never know because a lot of places just wouldn't have recorded that someone was lynched. But what they've done is they've found over 4,000 names of people who were lynched from the late 1800s through the mid-1900s. And every location where a lynching happened, with as specific a location as they can get, whether it be city, county, or state, they have put together a pillar that has the location on it and the names of all the people who were lynched there. And so you go and there are hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of these metal pillars hanging from the roof of the structure in Montgomery, Alabama. And you walk through and you just see the names of people and the dates they were lynched, and how many locations had one person who was lynched there, and how many locations had 40 people who were lynched there. And it's just very moving to realize the opposite of shalom that was extended to children of God in the life of our nation. So it was a very, very moving experience to be there in that place and look at those names. And they had other plaques that would give you a bit more history and information, and to help you recognize that when we think of racism and civil rights and all these things, we tend to think of it in terms of North versus South. But to disabuse you of that myth, one of the plaques that they have there is of a group of people who were lynched. There were 3 or 4 people who were lynched by a mob of 10,000 people in Minnesota. This wasn't just something that happened in the South. And it's hard for us to admit, but there was a pillar for Ohio that was there that had 15 names on it. 15 people lynched in our state. The most recent of which happened in 1932. We have not done a good job of extending shalom to one another. And we need to do something better. So the message for us this morning from the gospel is that we need to heed the words of Jesus. Today, Jesus is sending us out into the world to give the message of shalom. To give the message of peace. And not just any old peace, but a deep, abiding peace that cannot be shaken. To remind the world that there is a love beyond measure that does not require anything of us. Our first task is to give a message of peace to everyone we encounter. So as Jesus sent out the 70, today I'm going to send you out into the world. And I'm giving you a task. Go out into the world. And every single person you encounter, extend a message of peace to them. Whatever way makes sense to you. If you want to do it the way I would do it, just go and say, peace be with you. But if there's a way that makes sense to you, do it in whatever way makes sense to you. It could be the first thing you say to them. It could be something that comes up in conversation. But whatever you do with every single person you encounter for the next week, at some point, extend to them a message of the peace of God meant for them. Invoke the name of God and God's peace on that person. That's the task I give you. You will be like lambs sent into the midst of wolves, because there are people who will not receive that peace. That's not your concern. There are people who will resist you and tell you that it's ridiculous and it's weird and it's awkward. That's not your concern. Your concern is to respond to that first call, to go out and extend shalom to everyone you encounter. May the peace of God be upon you. Go in peace to love and serve the Lord in every person you meet. This is the task I give you today. I pray that you take me up on it. Amen.
Terrorizing the black community, white mobs lynched more than 4,000 black people. 4,000 black people. 4,000 black people in the South between 1877 and 1950, and more than 180 of them were killed in South Carolina. As you witness the bringing of these vessels of soil for holy consecration, may you declare yourself a repairer of the breach, an instrument of reparatory justice that declares never again we are standing on holy ground.
It was moving to stick our hands in that dirt and to look at actual soil that holds too many people's DNA. I think is a powerful way of symbolizing the history of lynching in the United States.